I don't think many people would want me to be queen. Actually, when I say many people, I mean the establishment that I'm married into. Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
King Charles has just dropped the most explosive confession in royal history, and Buckingham Palace is an absolute meltdown. The monarch has shattered decades of royal silence, finally admitting the brutal truth that destroyed Diana's dreams and sealed her tragic fate. Palace insiders are calling it the ultimate betrayal, a revelation so devastating it could tear apart everything the monarchy represents. But why has Charles chosen to expose this earth-shattering truth now? Insiders suggest the timing isn't random, it's deliberate. Every moment of their marriage was a battle for the soul of the monarchy, and Diana never stood a chance. The marriage that was never meant to last. The fairy tale was a lie from the very first kiss. While a billion people watched Diana walk down that aisle in 1981, believing they were witnessing the love story of the century, something sinister was already unfolding behind the cathedral's ancient walls. The marriage wasn't about love, it was about damage control. Charles has now shattered the illusion with brutal honesty. The marriage was never a partnership. It was a containment operation designed to control what the palace saw as a dangerous threat. Palace insiders knew what the world didn't. Diana Spencer wasn't chosen for her heart. She was chosen because she could be controlled. A shy kindergarten teacher with no political ambitions, no media savvy, no dangerous ideas about changing the monarchy. She was supposed to be the perfect royal accessory, beautiful, silent, and obedient. But they catastrophically underestimated her. Within months, the woman they thought would fade into the background was blazing across front pages worldwide. Every charity visit became a masterclass in compassion. Every public appearance drew crowds that had never cheered that loudly for Charles himself. The accessory was becoming the main attraction. Charles admits with chilling clarity that Diana wasn't following the script the palace had written for her, and that terrified everyone in power. The palace watched in growing horror as Diana redefined what royalty could be. She touched AIDS patients when doctors wore gloves. She knelt with homeless children when protocol demanded distance. She cried in public when tradition required stoicism. Each act of genuine humanity made the rest of the royal family look cold, distant, and irrelevant. The comparison was destroying Charles before he could even inherit the throne. But what happened next would seal Diana's fate forever. Because the palace realized they hadn't married Charles to a submissive princess, they had unleashed a force that could topple the entire monarchy. Senior courtiers began holding emergency meetings behind closed doors. The question wasn't whether Diana was good for Charles, it was whether she was too dangerous for the crown to survive. Charles reveals the devastating conclusion they reached. No queen could be allowed to become more beloved than her king, and Diana was becoming exactly that. The fairy tale was about to become a nightmare, and Diana, still believing in love and duty, had no idea she was about to be destroyed by the very institution she was trying to serve. The war for the soul of the monarchy had begun, and the palace had already decided who had to lose. The dangerous princess who threatened everything. Diana's popularity wasn't just overwhelming, it was revolutionary, and revolutions terrify monarchies. Within 2 years of marriage, something unprecedented was happening. The future queen was eclipsing the future king so completely that the very foundation of royal hierarchy was cracking. Charles now admits what palace insiders feared to say aloud. Diana wasn't just popular, she was becoming sovereign in everything but name. The future queen was threatening to eclipse the future king so completely that the monarchy's foundation was cracking. The numbers were devastating to royal egos. When Charles and Diana toured Australia together, 90% of the crowds were there for her. When they visited the United States, President Reagan spent the entire state dinner talking to Diana while Charles sat forgotten. When they appeared on balconies, the roar of "Diana! Diana!" drowned out any mention of the heir to the throne. But popularity was only the beginning of the threat Diana posed. She was rewriting the rules of monarchy with every breath. The institution that had survived for 1,000 years by maintaining distance, dignity, and mystique was being revolutionized by a woman who hugged children in hospitals and cried with grieving mothers. Diana wasn't just being royal, she was being human, and humanity, Charles now confesses, was the monarchy's greatest enemy. Charles now confesses the terrifying truth the monarchy discovered. The crown survives on reverence, but Diana was creating something far more dangerous: genuine love. And love is infinitely more powerful than reverence could ever be. The palace realized with growing terror that Diana wasn't just changing how people saw the royal family, she was changing what they expected from it. Citizens who had once been content with distant waves and formal ceremonies now demanded emotional connection, genuine compassion, and real impact on their lives. Diana was making the monarchy relevant again, and that relevance was threatening to destroy everything the institution represented. Behind closed doors, senior royals were asking questions that had never been asked before. What happens when the queen is more beloved than the king? What happens when the people choose their own royal rather than accepting the one born to rule? What happens when the monarchy's future becomes dependent on one woman's approval? The answers terrified them. Charles now admits the conversation that sealed Diana's fate. The Queen Mother declared that the crown cannot serve two masters. Either Diana would serve the crown, or the crown would serve her. There was no middle ground possible. The Queen Mother's words were a death sentence disguised as wisdom, because by then it was already too late for Diana to step back into the shadows. The world had tasted what royalty could be when it was powered by genuine love rather than ancient tradition. They had seen what a princess could accomplish when she chose compassion over protocol, and they wanted more. The palace faced an impossible choice: embrace the revolution Diana represented and watch the ancient monarchy transform beyond recognition, or destroy the woman who had become its greatest threat. They chose destruction, and Diana never saw it coming. The palace war that consumed everything. What happened next wasn't a marriage falling apart. It was an institution fighting for its survival. The palace machine, refined over centuries to protect the monarchy from any threat, turned its full power against the woman who had dared to make them irrelevant. Charles now reveals the systematic campaign that would destroy Diana. The palace machine turned its full power against the woman who had dared to make them irrelevant. It wasn't personal, it was institutional survival, and the crown always survives. The war began with whispers, carefully planted stories about Diana's emotional instability, strategic leaks about her difficult behavior, anonymous sources questioning her fitness for royal duty. Every weapon in the royal arsenal was deployed against the woman who had once been their greatest asset. Diana found herself fighting enemies she couldn't see, accusations she couldn't answer, and a narrative she couldn't control. But the palace had underestimated Diana's greatest weapon, the truth. For every story they planted, Diana had a counterattack. For every anonymous source, she had public appearances that showed the world who she really was. For every attempt to paint her as unstable, she had moments of pure grace that reminded millions why they loved her. The war escalated when Diana began fighting back with devastating effectiveness. She courted journalists the palace couldn't control. She gave interviews that revealed truths the monarchy desperately wanted hidden. She used her platform to champion causes that made the rest of the royal family look heartless by comparison. Most dangerously of all, she began telling her own story. Charles admits the moment he knew the war was lost. When Diana sat for that explosive Panorama interview, she wasn't just speaking to the country, she was declaring independence from the entire royal system. Diana's words on that infamous night would haunt the palace forever. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. But the revelation about Camilla was just the beginning. The real earthquake came when Diana admitted what everyone suspected, but no one dared say: "I don't think I will ever be queen." Those words weren't surrender, they were liberation. By admitting she would never wear the crown, Diana freed herself to become something more powerful than any queen in history. She became the people's princess, answerable to no institution, bound by no protocol, limited only by her own conscience. The palace watched in horror as Diana transformed her defeat into victory. Charles's moment of devastating truth. The breaking point came not in public scandal, but in private moments that stripped away every illusion Charles had left. Standing in his private study at Highgrove, surrounded by centuries of royal portraits, Charles finally admitted what he could no longer deny. His wife had become more royal than he would ever be, and that realization was destroying him. Charles confesses with brutal self-awareness that he was the heir to 1,000 years of tradition, yet found himself treated as an extra in his own inheritance. The humiliation was constant and crushing. Every foreign tour became an exercise in public emasculation. In Canada, children pushed past Charles to reach Diana. In Japan, photographers ignored the heir to capture every smile of his wife. In Brazil, the president spent an entire state dinner discussing charity work with Diana, while Charles sat forgotten at his own table. But it was a moment at the White House that finally broke him. Watching Diana dance with John Travolta while he stood alone on the sidelines, Charles experienced what he now describes as complete irrelevance. The future King of England was a spectator at his own life, watching his wife become a global icon while he faded into the background. Charles admits what still haunts him. Diana had conquered America in one evening, achieving something he could never accomplish in a lifetime of trying. The personal anguish was compounded by a professional crisis that threatened everything the monarchy represented. Palace advisors began delivering reports that read like wartime intelligence briefings. Diana's approval ratings were stratospheric while Charles's remained stagnant. Her charity work was generating headlines that made the rest of the royal family look selfish. Her genuine emotional responses were making royal stoicism appear cold and outdated. Most devastating of all, constitutional experts were beginning to ask dangerous questions about the line of succession itself. What if the people want her to be queen instead of him? These whispered conversations reached Charles through loyal courtiers. The question was hypothetical, impossible, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood how monarchies actually work. Charles now admits the conversation that changed everything. His mother told him he had to choose between his wife and his inheritance. No king in history had ever survived being overshadowed by his queen. The queen's words were delivered with the cold efficiency of royal survival. Diana had to be contained, controlled, or eliminated as a threat to Charles's future reign. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. As Charles struggled with his impossible choice, he discovered that Diana had already made hers. She wasn't trying to compete with him for the throne. She was building something entirely outside the monarchy's control. She was creating a legacy that would outlast any crown. Charles confesses with devastating clarity the moment he realized the truth. Diana had stopped trying to be queen and started being something much more dangerous, completely, authentically herself. The woman who could never wear the crown was about to become more beloved than any monarch in history. And Charles, faced with that reality, made the choice that would define both their legacies forever. He chose the throne over his wife. And Diana, perhaps understanding this better than anyone, chose the people over the crown. The marriage was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Most powerfully of all, Diana proved that royalty without humanity was meaningless. Charles confesses with devastating self-awareness that Diana showed the world what the monarchy could be. By comparison, what they actually were looked pathetic and outdated. The woman who would never wear the crown had become more royal than any monarch in history. Her death would complete a transformation that terrified the palace. Diana became immortal in a way no queen ever could. Frozen in time at the height of her compassion, her legacy would inspire generations while the monarchy aged and became increasingly irrelevant. Charles admits in his most devastating revelation that by never becoming queen, Diana achieved something no monarch ever could. She became eternal. The palace had won every battle: the marriage, the divorce, the custody arrangements, the titles, the protocols. But Diana had won the only war that mattered, the battle for human hearts. And from that victory, there would be no appeal, no reversal, no constitutional remedy. The woman who was too dangerous to be queen had become too beloved to be forgotten, and that legacy would haunt the monarchy for generations to come. The Crown's greatest confession. King Charles has finally spoken the unspeakable truth. Diana could never be queen, not because she was unworthy, but because she was too worthy. Not because she was too weak, but because she was too strong. Not because she couldn't serve the crown, but because the crown could never contain her. In making this confession, Charles has revealed the monarchy's greatest secret. They destroyed their most beloved member to save themselves from being transformed by her greatness. Charles admits with devastating finality that while the institution survived Diana's threat, it came at the cost of its soul. Diana's tragedy wasn't that she couldn't be queen, it was that she was already something greater. A queen serves her country. Diana served humanity. A queen wears a crown that will eventually pass to another. Diana wore the love of millions that will never fade. The palace calculated that sacrificing one woman would preserve centuries of tradition, but they didn't anticipate that the woman they sacrificed would become more powerful in death than she ever was in life. They didn't realize that by denying her the crown, they had given her immortality. Charles concludes with words that will echo through history. Diana was never meant to be queen because queens are forgotten, but Diana never will be. The confession is complete. The truth is finally exposed. The woman who was too dangerous for the throne has been revealed as too precious for the world to lose. Charles has admitted what millions always suspected. The royal family destroyed the best of themselves to protect the worst of their traditions. And in doing so, they created a legacy that will outlast every crown, every protocol, every ceremony they hold sacred. Diana never became Queen of England, but she became something infinitely more powerful, Queen of Hearts, forever. The monarchy survived Diana's threat to their traditions, but they never recovered from losing her love. And that, perhaps, is the most devastating confession of all.